There is a strong chance that somewhere in your home right now, within reach of where you are sitting, there is an object you have touched more times than you can count, and yet you have never truly understood what it is. Perhaps it is a small bottle of water sitting quietly on a shelf, blessed once by a priest and then forgotten among candles and old photographs. Perhaps it is a thin line of white crystals you sprinkled across a windowsill or a doorway because your mother or grandmother told you it was good luck, a tradition, something families have always done without ever explaining why. Perhaps it is a small wooden or metal cross hanging above your bed or your front door, so familiar to your eyes that you no longer see it at all. You have prayed the rosary. You have made the sign of the cross before a meal or before sleep. You have asked God, almost as a whisper, to keep your home and your family safe through the night. And in doing all of this, you have already been in contact with three of the most powerful instruments of protection that the Catholic Church possesses, without ever knowing the true weight of what you were holding in your hands. What very few people are ever told, what has been buried under layers of routine, softened by familiarity, and quietly forgotten by generations who stopped asking why their elders did the things they did, is that holy water, blessed salt, and a properly blessed crucifix are not decorations, customs, or sentimental objects passed down for nostalgia. They are not symbols in the way a flag or a family crest is a symbol. They carry within them an active spiritual authority, granted through the blessing of the Church, rooted in centuries of prayer, exorcism, and divine protection. This is precisely the kind of truth that the enemy of our souls works hardest to keep hidden, not because it is complicated or rare, but because it is so simple, so accessible, and so devastatingly effective against him that he cannot afford for ordinary believers to take it seriously. If every Catholic household understood and used these three things with real faith and real intention, entire categories of spiritual attack would lose their foothold before they ever even began. This is not superstition. This is not a ritual gesture meant only to comfort the nervous or to satisfy an old family habit passed down without thought. When the Church blesses water, salt, or an object such as a crucifix, something genuinely changes in the spiritual order of that object. The blessing draws on the authority that Christ gave to his church, the same authority by which sins are forgiven in confession and by which bread and wine become the body and blood of the Lord at the altar. It is not magic, and it is not automatic in the way a machine works, but it is real, and it is tied directly to the faith of the person who uses it. Padre Gabriele Amorth, who served as an exorcist of the Diocese of Rome for decades, and who took part in tens of thousands of exorcisms and prayers of deliverance, spoke about this constantly. He often explained that demons react to holy water, blessed salt, and blessed objects the way a person reacts to fire, not because the water itself is special in a chemical sense, but because of what the blessing represents, the authority of the Church standing directly against the powers of darkness. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus tells his disciples that in his name they will drive out demons. And throughout the history of the Church, the use of blessed water, blessed salt, and blessed objects has been part of exactly that mission, an extension of the very authority Christ gave to those who follow him. Padre Amorth often recounted how, during exorcisms, the simple act of sprinkling holy water on a person under demonic influence could provoke violent reactions, screaming, convulsions, sudden changes in the voice things that no ordinary tap water could ever cause in anyone. He explained that this was not because the water had some kind of independent power separate from God, as if it were a magical potion brewed with secret ingredients, but because the blessing places that water under the protection and authority of the church, and the demon recognizes and reacts to that authority immediately and instinctively. This is the misunderstanding so many people carry without realizing it. They think holy water is either nothing more than plain water with a label, or they think it works like a spell, something that acts on its own regardless of the faith of the person using it. Neither of these is true. It is not an empty gesture, and it is not a magic charm. It is a sacramental, a sign instituted by the church that, when used with faith, opens a channel for God's grace and protection to act in a very real and tangible way in the ordinary moments of life. Think about how holy water is treated in most homes today. It sits in a small plastic bottle, often shaped like the Virgin Mary or a saint, bought as a souvenir from a shrine or a pilgrimage years ago. It might be used once during a blessing of the house when a priest visits, and then placed on a shelf and never touched again. It is not seen as something to be used, but as something to be kept, almost like a trophy of a trip rather than a tool of defense. But this is exactly the inversion that needs to be corrected in the mind of every believer. It is not a souvenir to be displayed and admired. It is a sacramental to be used again and again with intention and with prayer, day after day, week after week, year after year. Padre Amorth recommended that the faithful bless themselves with holy water every single day, not only on special occasions, making the sign of the cross with it as a way of renewing their baptismal consecration and reaffirming their belonging to Christ before the world and before the powers of darkness. He taught that this simple daily act, done with faith, builds up a kind of spiritual defense over time, the same way that consistent prayer and the sacraments build up a person's resistance to temptation and to attack. It is not a one-time ritual performed out of obligation on a single afternoon. It is a daily renewal of the protection that was first given at baptism, and it is meant to be lived, not stored. Now consider blessed salt, which is perhaps the most misunderstood of the three. In many cultures, salt has long been associated with protection, purification, and the warding off of bad luck. And over time, this folk understanding has mixed with the Catholic tradition in ways that can confuse people about what is actually happening when they use it. Some people sprinkle salt across doorways or windowsills out of pure habit, almost as a charm, without any real prayer or intention behind it, treating it more like a piece of folklore passed down at the kitchen table than an act of living faith. But within the Catholic tradition, salt that has been properly blessed by a priest carries the same kind of sacramental authority as holy water, and it should never be approached lightly. In the traditional blessing of salt, the prayers explicitly ask that this salt become a means of warding off the attacks of the enemy, that wherever it is placed or sprinkled, every unclean spirit, every illusion, every trick of diabolical deceit be driven far away from that place. This is not a vague hope whispered into the air, or a poetic phrase meant to sound comforting. It is a direct petition to God, made through the authority of the Church, asking that this ordinary substance from the earth become a true instrument of spiritual cleansing. It is not a lucky charm passed down through family superstition like a rabbit's foot or a coin in a shoe. It is a consecrated instrument of the Church's authority over evil, and when it is used with that understanding, sprinkled with prayer rather than with mere habit, it becomes part of the very same spiritual battle that Padre Amorth fought every single day of his long ministry. And then there is the crucifix, perhaps the most visible of the three, and yet often the most overlooked of all. A crucifix hanging on a wall can become so familiar that the eyes simply pass over it, the same way they pass over a clock or a picture frame hung years ago. It becomes part of the background of a room, present but unnoticed, decorative but disconnected from any living faith in the heart of the person who walks past it every single day. But a blessed crucifix is not merely an image of a historical event from 2,000 years ago, frozen in wood or metal. It is a representation of the single greatest act of love and victory in all of history, the moment when Christ defeated sin and death once and for all time. And when it has been blessed, it carries with it the very authority of that victory into the space where it hangs. Padre Amorth often described how, during exorcisms, the mere presence of a crucifix, especially one that had been properly blessed, could provoke intense reactions from the demon afflicting a person, reactions of fury, fear, and resistance that had absolutely nothing to do with the physical object itself, the wood or the metal, and everything to do with what that object represents and carries. It is not simply a piece of religious art to be admired for its craftsmanship or its age. It is not a cultural ornament that happens to be Christian in theme, hung up because it matches the room. It is a constant, visible declaration of the victory of the cross over every power of darkness, and when it is placed and venerated with real faith, it becomes a genuine point of spiritual defense within the walls of a home. This understanding is nothing new, and it did not begin with Padre Amorth, though he spent his entire life reminding modern Catholics of truths that the early Church simply took for granted as part of daily life. From the earliest centuries of Christianity, the faithful made the sign of the cross over themselves, over their food, and over their homes as a defense against evil, a practice so common among early believers that pagan writers of the time noted it with confusion, unable to understand why these Christians traced this simple gesture over doorways and foreheads with such seriousness and consistency. Saints throughout history wrote about the power of holy water and blessed objects not as superstition, but as real weapons in the spiritual life of every believer. Saint Teresa of Avila, one of the great mystics of the Church, wrote that she had experienced firsthand how the use of holy water could put evil spirits to flight. Describing it as one of the most effective means of defense she knew, more effective at times than many other things she had tried in moments of spiritual struggle. The Desert Fathers, the monks who lived in extreme solitude in the early centuries of Christianity, treated the sign of the cross and blessed water as essential tools in their daily battle against the temptations and attacks they experienced in their isolation, far from any town or church. None of these were superstitious or uneducated people clinging to folk magic out of ignorance. They were men and women who had devoted their entire lives to prayer and to understanding the spiritual realm with depth and seriousness, and they treated these simple sacramentals with the same care that a soldier gives to his weapons before walking into battle. Now, for a moment, Imagine walking through your own home with this understanding fully alive in your heart, not as a theory you heard once, but as something you carry with you from room to room. Imagine standing at your front door each morning, dipping your fingers into a small font of holy water you keep there, and making the sign of the cross slowly, deliberately, not as a quick habit performed half asleep, but as a true renewal of your baptism, asking God to seal that doorway against anything that does not come from Him. Imagine walking through each room of your house with a small container of blessed salt, praying quietly as you place a little in the corners, near the windows, close to the entrances, asking that every space in your home be cleansed of any influence that does not belong to the light. Imagine looking up at the crucifix on your wall, not as a piece of decoration you have walked past 1,000 times without thinking, but as a living reminder that the very same power that conquered death itself is present in your home, watching over you and your family while you sleep, while you work, while you sit at the table together. Feel the difference between walking through your home unaware, surrounded by these objects without ever truly seeing them, and walking through that same home awake, aware, and spiritually fortified, knowing that every blessed object you encounter throughout the day is a small but very real point of light pushing back against the darkness around you. If, as you listen to this, you feel something stir inside you, a recognition, a memory of a grandmother who always kept holy water by the door, or a small crucifix that has been passed down in your family for generations, take a moment to leave a like on this video before you continue. And if you have your own story, your own experience with holy water, blessed salt, or a crucifix that has been part of your family's protection over the years, share it in the comments below this video. So many people carry these small stories without ever realizing how important they really are, and by sharing them, you may be reminding someone else of a piece of their own faith that they had forgotten long ago. And if these teachings about Padre Amorth, about spiritual warfare, and about the real power available to ordinary Catholics in their everyday lives resonate with you, subscribe to this channel, because there is so much more of this hidden knowledge still waiting to be uncovered, teachings that have been quietly preserved by the Church for centuries, but rarely spoken about in ordinary conversation today. It should not surprise you that so few people are taught these things clearly, because the enemy has every reason to keep this knowledge buried as deeply as possible. A demon does not fear a crucifix that is seen only as art, or holy water that is treated only as a souvenir on a shelf, or salt that is sprinkled out of empty habit with no thought behind it. What the enemy truly fears is faith joined to these sacramentals, the living connection between a believer's heart and the authority of the Church that these objects carry within them. As long as people remain unaware, as long as these things stay reduced to nostalgia, decoration, or vague family tradition, the enemy can move more freely, working through small cracks left open by carelessness, by neglect, by a kind of spiritual amnesia that has quietly settled over entire generations. Padre Amorth often spoke about how many of the cases he encountered involved people who had, often without realizing it, opened doors to negative influences through curiosity, through dabbling in things they did not fully understand, or simply through living without any real spiritual defense at all, treating their faith as something private and passive rather than something active and protective in daily life. When a believer rediscovers the true meaning of holy water, blessed salt, and the crucifix, and begins to use them again with real faith, real intention, and real prayer, something shifts in that home. It becomes less hospitable to the enemy. The believer becomes harder to disturb, harder to manipulate, harder to frighten, because they are no longer walking through life unarmed and unaware. They are surrounded, quite literally, by the protection of the church, carried within the smallest and most ordinary objects. Objects that the enemy would prefer remain forgotten on a shelf forever, gathering dust, unused and unremembered. There is also something Padre Amorth repeated again and again to those who came to him, something that often surprised people because it seemed almost too simple to matter. He explained that the effectiveness of these sacramentals is never separate from the state of the soul that uses them. A person can sprinkle holy water across every room of their house, can place blessed salt in every corner, can hang crucifixes on every wall, and still feel unprotected, still feel that darkness is pressing in if their own life remains closed off from confession, from the Eucharist, from genuine repentance and prayer. The sacramentals are not a replacement for the sacraments, and they were never meant to be. They are an extension of them, a kind of overflow of grace into the physical world, into the ordinary objects and spaces of daily life. Holy water draws its deepest meaning from baptism. Blessed salt and the crucifix draw their deepest meaning from the sacrifice of Christ remembered and renewed at every Mass. This is why Padre Amorth always paired his teaching about these objects with a call back to the sacraments themselves, reminding people that confession, regular Mass attendance, and a life of prayer are the foundation upon which all of this protection truly stands. Without that foundation, holy water remains water, salt remains salt, and a crucifix remains wood and metal. With that foundation, each of these becomes what the Church has always understood them to be, channels of grace placed directly into the hands of ordinary people for the protection of their homes, their families, and their own souls. There is a reason why, in the rite for the blessing of a home, the priest does not simply walk through with a sprinkler and a bag of salt as if performing a chore to be checked off a list. He prays. He asks God to fill that space with His presence, to drive out anything that does not belong there, and to surround the family living within those walls with His protection day and night. The holy water and the blessed salt used in that moment are not the source of the protection. God is the source. But the Church has, throughout her long history, recognized that God often chooses to work through these visible signs, through water, through salt, through the wood of a cross, precisely because human beings are not pure spirits. We are creatures of body and soul together, and we need things we can see, touch, and hold in order to remember spiritual realities that would otherwise slip away from our minds within hours. This is why Padre Amorth never dismissed these objects as childish or beneath the dignity of a serious spiritual life. He understood from decades spent face to face with the reality of evil that the enemy takes these things seriously even when human beings do not, and that this alone should be enough to make every believer pause and reconsider how they treat the holy water, the blessed salt, and the crucifix that may already be sitting quietly somewhere in their own home tonight. But there is something else, something that Padre Amorth warned about again and again throughout his many years as an exorcist. Something that has nothing to do with holy water, salt, or the crucifix directly, and everything to do with a quiet habit that many faithful Catholics practice without ever suspecting that it might be doing the exact opposite of what they intend. It is a habit so common, so ordinary, so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life that almost no one ever stops to question it. And yet it may be one of the very things quietly working against the protection these sacred objects are meant to provide in a home. What that habit is, why it matters far more than most people realize, and how something so small could be silently undoing years of prayers, blessings, and sacramentals without anyone noticing, is something we will uncover together in the next video, so that nothing is left standing between you and the full protection that God desires for you and for everyone you love.